I apologize in advance. This is one of those weird lectures that doesn't have pictures. So I apologize if you were expecting a lot of visual. Feel free to fall asleep if you can't do that. So I'm used to being able to learn about a map project and in short order be able to see in my mind's eye, the way it might be arranged, what elements might be put in what places. I've been doing this for long enough and have enough of a visual brain. It's a fun challenge and usually not a struggle as such. This paper has been a struggle because it's yearning for a map, and I have had a very hard time figuring out what should be on it. What I want, what I yearn for, is a map that shows how two different papers from a third of a century ago fit together. In our everyday lives, living, standing on the ground, navigation is about what we can sense, what's behind us, in front of us, and either side of us. With a map, the kind of map I spend my professional life making, I can see all those things at once. I can see and so understand a bunch of spatial relationships in a way I can't see on the ground. Moral and ethical discussions often try to be like this, be maps, showing us social and behavioral linkages that are bigger than we are. On the other hand, a lot of the discussions are also about very local issues, you, me, and them. Most of us want to be good. I know I do. And discussions about ethics and morality are at root talks about how we might be good, how we should be good, or can be good. But it's felt to me like many discussions with a moral or ethical cast to them end up spinning out away from where we are. I remember stepping out of an impassioned talk here at NACIS years ago, and Stuart Allen, in his wry Stuart Allen way, nodded, looked at me and said, yeah, but so what? Even when issues raised and when moral discussions have a sense of vital urgency, real people actually dying and maps are in the mix, I'm left hanging and not really connected meaningfully to the issue. We don't really see ourselves in the moral map presented. How is that? How is it that I can look at a map where the same questions are both vital and irrelevant? A schema I proposed for my last few presentations begins with the question, who am I making this map for? It concludes that I'm usually facing multiple constituencies who have varying ideas of how I should be good. My model has 6 categories, but it's an arbitrary set. Feel free to make up your own. End users, clients, partners in creation, cartography as a field, my world and community, and myself. That's been a useful shape for me to sketch this out, a useful sketch map of the moral space, but it doesn't really solve the question of these 2 papers I want to talk about. In the fall of 1990, Cartographic Perspectives published a roundtable discussion on ethical problems in cartography. There were 5 panelists, Michael Dobson from Rand McNally, remember them, representing the commercial sphere. Sona Carence-Andrews from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, representing the academic sphere, and 2 people from an unnamed US government department who contributed anonymously because their department had refused to let them publish under their names and positions. And Patrick McAfee of the University of Kentucky, the organizer of the roundtable, who introduced and summed up. McAfee defined ethics as principles of conduct guiding the practices of an individual or professional group. And the panelists were asked, in essence, what ethical issues do you see people in your sphere needing to confront? The responses in summing up included concerns about quality of work and copyright from Rand McNally, concerns from government cartographers about political, bureaucratic, and political public pressure on the quality of work and the threat of badly managed automation. Andrews also invoked copyright and automation as fields of concern in her students, and then noted a theme that has run through cartographic discourse ever since, the troubled idea that maps are scientific or objective and therefore a mirror of reality. Less than a year later, summer of 1991 issue included 2 responses. One was by Mark Monmonier, who's been coming to NACIS ever since, whose book How to Lie with Maps was also published that year. But the other, the one I really want to focus on, was J.B. Harley's final published paper, Can There Be a Cartographic Ethics? Harley was on a bit of a roll. His provocative and influential 1989 essay in Cartographica, Deconstructing the Map, and a 1990 follow-up on the same journal, opened up the field of cartographic criticism in a way that's still being felt today. So this paper counts to me as the final paper of an unintentional trilogy. He clearly was not expecting his sudden death in the December of 1991. The initial roundtable asked for and received responses that talk about ethical issues within the scope of cartographic practice. Harley then talks about these issues as narrow in the central questions his paper seeks to address. Can there be an ethically informed cartography, and what should be its agenda? How can we go about formulating principles and rules that would allow us to arbitrate moral judgments in the particular cartographic circumstances? Can we debate cartographic ethics in the narrow arena of internal practice, looking for a pragmatic code of professional conduct? Or should we be concerned with the transcendental values that go to the heart of social justice in the world at large? The examples he gives of moral and ethical issues that ought to be addressable within cartographic discourse include U.S. participation in the first Gulf War, the dispossession of the Global South, as represented in the Peters projection, for example, or the use of maps to create segregated landscape under apartheid in South Africa. On the other hand, he specifically dismisses intellectual property as a trivial non-issue. And while he calls out as false the idea that issues of symbolization, scale, projection, and so forth have nothing to do with ethics, he also wants us more focused on these large-scale public issues. His point is we should stop trying to escape the fact that what we do has consequences in the world, and that those consequences have moral value, and that every part of our work carries some sort of meaning, that there is no such thing as a culturally neutral expression. I think these are both true. So why does he still tick me off? First, he plays dirty pool, rhetorically speaking. He sets up a landscape where his point of view is novel and the subject of ethics is widely ignored. It's interesting to compare his opening scenario of the state of ethics in the field with Patrick McAfee's in the roundtable discussion. Harley's opening point is a lack in the literature of cartography of ethics, that the discipline could be accused of complacency. McAfee, by contrast, notes recent panel discussions at conferences and published discussions of ethical issues around GIS and says these examples point to an emerging discourse in the ethics of cartography. Harley opens with an event little discussed in the media, a demonstration at the Defense Mapping Agency at the head up to the first Gulf War. And this very story was, in fact, covered in the winter 1990 issue of Cartographic Perspectives in the Maps in the News section. He also sets up a false dichotomy by asking whether we should debate ethics within the field, or should we be concerned with transcendental ethics? Should you pay attention to your family or join the protest march? Should you sign the petition or go eat lunch? It's a nonsensical choice, given the number of people who both pay attention to ethics nearby and issues in the world as a whole. Second, he spent too much time, for my taste, in deconstruction. I'm afraid I've just lost patience with the idea that factuality isn't important. That no one is perfectly factual, so stop pretending that there are facts. In 2023, it feels like a period piece argument, meant to push back forcefully against excessive faith in science's ability to answer all our needs. We need the knowledge fields. We need more than that. We need to recognize the knowledge fields, the body of human knowledge, is the result of a lot of people committing themselves, their life's work really, to it. And those two government cartographers talking about the risks of disconnect between fact and policy as outside forces give them bad instructions for making their maps. And Andrew's discussing at length the problem of getting students to see that maps are neither mirrors of the world nor singular best ways of portraying the world. Both are talking about trying to grapple with that wider world, with the basic ethic of humility and care that reflects the real world as best we can. In other words, the basic worldview or even ideology of the modern knowledge fields. It's not a trivial concern, even if it doesn't make the headlines. The presentations I've been making the last few years have centered on a model of social relationship in our professional lives that comes out of recent understandings from the field of moral psychology. The key point I've been working with is that moral judgment is grounded in social connection. Groupish behavior in Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory, game partners in a non-zero games in Curry et al.'s more recent morality as cooperation theory, but always morality reinforces and aligns social connections. It does not, however, I observe, tend to create them. That is, we don't tend to form bonds around morality, but common moralities give us support to bond over any number of other things. Haidt doesn't spend enough time talking about scale. It's one of my big beefs with moral foundations theory. It's a point that anyone who spends time with maps understands easily. There is clearly a difference between walking on the ground, as I said earlier, in my neighborhood in Minneapolis, and looking at a map of my neighborhood. But there is even more of a connect, between those two than there is between my looking at, say, a map of Minnesota or the United States. For the former, I can relate my motion in real time, the kinds of specific narrative action you could reproduce in a film or a piece of theater, to a graphic representation. Not so for a smaller scale, wider area map, but they're both maps and they both use the same language. The moral analogs to those local interactions, the ones on the large scale neighborhood map, rather than being trivial end of morality, are, I would argue, the foundation and origin of ethical and moral behavior, for the same reason that my actual moment-to-moment actions are played out on local maps. Big stuff is important, vitally important, Harley isn't wrong there, but local interactions, local areas are where we live. I think, though, that both Harley and Haidt fall into a trap of thinking about small-scale interactions. In Haidt's case, it's thinking of morality as related to groupish behavior, and then of groups as nameable, coate entities. When I think of how social connections and attachments form, say here at NACIS, it's not through membership, or even necessarily through presentations like this. It's through conversations within organically evolving networks of relationship. I know you, you know them, now I know them too. I know you, I know that you like and think highly of them, and I mostly trust your judgments, so I'll go take a closer look at them. This is how Homo sapiens social life happens, and how social networks develop. In Harley's case, it's assuming that we need rules and precepts to have morality. As I've said earlier, this is not how people work. We elucidate a formulation for those rules and precepts, but we dig them up out of the soup of moral understandings that develop in that organic social network. Cartography is not a coate group either, at least not socially. It's this other thing, a complicated chain of techniques and exemplars and habits, of shared syntax and specialized variants. Being a cartographer is a little like being part of a grand falloon, Kurt Vonnegut's name for a proud and meaningless association of human beings. We're not meaningless, we have a lot in common, but not as much as people like Harley who want to call cartography to task seem to think. And here's the thing, maybe the heart of my irritation with Harley's paper. You can't force people to bond together over something that they don't share. In a sense, cartography as a whole is like the UN. We have Ukrainian military cartographers and Russian military cartographers. We have cartographers for Greenpeace and cartographers working for Exxon. We have cartographers who work fervently for women's rights and cartographers who work for the Taliban in all its forms. And just by saying you're wrong to the ones we don't like, we're probably not going to change them, and we're not going to get them to stop being cartographers. We also, when we gather like the roundtable did to explore what people are doing around ethical and moral issues, won't be able to get everyone on board for anything if we plan on making it about all cartographers, and that needs to be okay. Harley quotes Dennis Wood, arguing that we need cartography to admit that cartography is political and that we can't avoid it. And what he says is relevant here too. Wood says, we will only be able to think clearly about our situation once that the fact that cartography is politicized and always has been is recognized. We will not be able to make intelligent choices until, having accepted our political instrumentality, we fully debate our situation with this in mind. There will materialize cartographers for peace and cartographers for a strong defense, but at least we will be through pretending we are not completely involved. Except I'll add this. I don't think we need to make those debates central to our practice. I think Harley and Wood are wrong here. The debates are probably key to our being citizens, maybe being key to our being part of our working organizations and disorganized networks of community. But trying to make that debate a key part of our identity is a mistake. It's not fundamentally what we do as cartographers. What makes us a member of the class of people called cartographers is that we measure the world and we draw scale models of it so that the map readers and users can understand things happening in a way that they can't on the ground. To me, that's it. Your maps may well have a profound moral component, but that's not what makes them maps. So how can I be good then? I want to be a good person who's a cartographer. How can I talk about ethics? How can I be part of a community of map makers, which I am, that has a sense of ethics that I'm on board with? How do I do that in any community? And this is the point, I think, when I try to answer those questions, that this stops being the map that I was looking for at the beginning of the essay. That stops being me using that map. I want to point that out because I think this is a point that many authors on ethics and morality arrive at. It's really tricky because we yearn to have this map of the landscape so we can use it. But being a map maker and a map user are not the same roles. As cartographers, in that broad ethic of the knowledge fields, we tell people that we are guides. We separate the role of descriptors and guides. Harley and others since then have argued that we become not good when we decline to take on the role of guide, given the knowledge we hold and impart. My answer is I make maps. I live into the stuff as best I can. I have conversations, maybe I help draft rules or principles within groups I'm part of that makes sense for what some of us think is a good way to be. Listen to what other people think, be active in discussions, be willing to say what you think, and recognize that other people believe differently. Ask lots and lots of questions, because the questions are how we end up figuring out what to do, individually and as groups. And most of all, we let ourselves wrestle with and not know exactly how to deal with the issues, big and small, that come before us. Like social networks being organic, our moral lives are organic too. And that's what I'm working with anyway, describing them, mapping them, exploring them, trying to come to terms with conflicts and celebrating certainties while we have them, and shrugging and going back to the drawing board when they become less certain. I don't know about you, but my maps are usually out of date the moment I press send. This is all a work in progress. We're all guessing. That's my presentation. And I want to give a plug for Eileen Buckley. Unfortunately, wasn't able to be here today. She was supposed to be the first presenter. She and I are co-editing a special issue. We're hoping to be out in the fall of 2024 on ethics and cartography. It's going to have 2 peer-reviewed papers. We're happy to talk to you about that. We haven't completely ironed out what those are going to be, but so if you have a particular one you want to do, let us know. But we're especially looking for, we're going to have a whole series of case studies. And we're looking for contributions for as many people from as diverse a background as possible. And what we're looking for particularly are people who are wrestling with or have wrestled with ethical issues in cartography. What we want is the wrestling. We're not looking for so much for people to give their ethical theories. We're looking for, how did you deal with this? How are you dealing with this? How aren't you dealing with it? How did you decide you just couldn't deal with it at all within the field of cartography? Shorter sections, they won't be peer reviewed, they'll be editorial reviewed. We'll try to make them work as pieces of text. We're looking for contributions by January. I think January 24th is our deadline, somewhere in there. If you're interested, please contact either one of us, or you can also get the full call for papers at that one. And with that, I am done talking unless people want to ask questions.
We have time for some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to stay by the mic.
Okay.
We do have time for some questions for now.
The answer is also great.
Hey Nat, we've talked many a time, so Nat and I have been on the DI committee before, and we've had many a great conversation about ethics, I suppose. And I'm curious, because you ended saying that you consider yourself someone who just makes maps, and that the ethical considerations, obviously as you started, are all varying just because there's so many ways in which we can't even convince people to change, like the extremes. But when we have to consider the semiology of graphics to ensure that the data is shown and represented in an accurate way and fashion, that's like technically part of ethics, and so is like the way that we make sure chloroplasts are represented appropriately and color schemes and stuff, that's implicitly ethics as well in terms of bias. So how do you think about those parts of it? Because those are all inherently also part of ethics, so then you are participating in the range of.
I don't think being human that we can avoid dealing with moral ethical issues. We're gonna. That's part of being any social situation. And so when we're making those decisions in a particular map project, yeah, we're gonna deal with those. My point is that saying that there is, for all of cartography, this is the right way to be, this is the ethical way to do things. Good luck. That you know, you might be able to find something like, I don't know what it would be that would be, if it's that universal, I'm not sure it'd be meaningful. Because at some point you're making a case for something, and that something is going to exclude some of cartographers. Now, you might make the argument that, well, we're the only ones, we're the ones who make good maps, and they make bad maps. They may call themselves, they're bad cartographers, and we are good cartographers. We can certainly do that. That's a decision we're going to make. And when we do that, that's going to mean there are cartographers who are outside of our group. If that's what we want to do, then we can do that. But we need to know then that we're NATO, not the UN. We've made a case that we actually don't want all cartographers in our group. We are excluding some of them. Which is, honestly, that's a lot of what morality does on a social function. That's part of why, you know, that's social moral psychology's point in general is that the reason we have morality from an evolutionary standpoint is because it bonds groups together. So, okay, you got a group that's not everybody. Mark.
Yeah, have you considered the relevance of documents and declarations like the two first things first declarations that were widely, especially the 2000 one that was widely disseminated amongst the graphic design world, where it was basically declaring that the graphic designers that were signing it were signing on to the fact that they were going to act ethically, that there's nothing in graphic design that is ethical or unethical, but that it's about them and the messages that they're putting forward, and that they won't. They were in their cases saying that they will not do work and take on jobs for clients that demand something that they feel is unethical.
I think that ties into what I was just saying to Vanessa. I think that and what Dennis Wood was saying, that you have cartographers for peace and cartographers for a strong defense. You're going to have groups that define themselves that way. The challenge is, I mean, this paper came out of being at the International Cartographic Association, where people were making declarations about maps as a whole on behalf of a worldwide organization in which there are some people who are not not going to be on the same basic board with you, and making clear that what you're saying is we are on this side, and if you want to do something otherwise, that's fine. I should back up because it's, oh no, okay, cool. Yeah, you want to? That's cool.
Did anybody have any more questions for Nat? All right.
Thank you.